Hello everyone and welcome to BodyBags. I'll be your reviewer for today. I'm Lonnie from Tats. And yeah, the theme this week is killer clowns. And I'm sure everybody's really surprised that I ended up deciding to go with this one. It had been done on BodyBags years and years back, but we decided, first of all, what I'm talking about is the 1990 miniseries of Stephen King's It. And real quick, just, brief, if you just kind of want to get in and out. I love this miniseries. I've always loved it. I remember I watched it the very first night it came out. I've always enjoyed this miniseries. I've had a soft spot in my heart for it for a long time, and I definitely urge you to watch it. The thing is, the reason why I wanted to go ahead and re-review this, even though it's been done on the channel before, is I just kind of wanted, it's like I've had a couple of people talk to me about, why are we even still talking about this mini series? Why does anybody even still keep bringing it up? And it's like now, it's been remade, so we got this. Why is anybody even talking about this? It's old. It was, a TV movie. These movies are. These movies are bloodier. These movies are longer. This is like well over 5 hours, as this is only 3 hours. So why are we even still talking about this? The thing is, what I really wanted to talk about is how this ended up, this mini-series, like, the thing is, it's like, a lot of people, I think, mostly like younger people. I think a lot of younger people don't realize that this is more than just a mini-series that came out on TV in 1990. This ended up becoming a real cultural phenomenon, kind of going all the way back, like when Stephen King was, going to write the book, if I remember, I have read the book, I read it a few years ago, and, it's like, but, listening to him in interviews and reading interviews and stuff with King, back in the late 70s, he kind of got like all these ideas for wanting to write this book. Like at first he said that one day he was walking on a bridge and he started thinking of, the story, Three Billy Goats Gruff, with the troll under the bridge and everything. And he started thinking about, he wanted to write a book about like a troll that, kind of like, drags kids down and eats them and stuff like that. Then you have, he said, then he got the idea he wanted to write a book about, he wanted to write a book where like all of the classic monsters would, be in this book. Dracula, Mummy, Wolfman, all this kind of stuff. And he needed kind of like a story that would support all of that. And then finally, of course, like in the late 70s, he got the germ of the idea for the book in the late 70s, as I understand it, but he didn't start writing the book until the early 80s. And another thing that, he got inspiration from John Wayne Gacy, because he was watching, the news footage, where they were bringing the bodies out of Gacy's house. And then he got the idea of, he wanted to do a story about, this thing that's masquerading as a clown to lure people in and kill them and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, then like, he let the ideas kind of percolate, and then it all, wound up forming this perfect storm of the book that would become It. Then he wrote the book and everything, and then, then we were getting out of the late 80s, it was announced that, it was going to be done as a television miniseries. And, at first it was going to be done as a 4-part miniseries, and it was going to be directed by George Romero. And Romero was on, he really wanted to try to, get as much of the book, the essence of the book and everything done as he could, and do it as faithfully as he possibly could. Well, then ABC was starting to get cold feet, and then they said, well, now we're not going to do it as a 4-part miniseries, we'll do it as a 3-part miniseries. And then eventually they hit the point where they said, well, now we're going to do it as a 2-part miniseries. And at that point, Romero felt like he couldn't adapt the book the way he wanted. and he couldn't really do it as faithfully to the book and get as much of the, the stuff from the book into the miniseries that he wanted to. So pretty much at that point, Romero just kind of threw up his hands and walked away. And then you had the teleplay that was done by Lawrence D. Cohen, who also, had written the, he had done the adaptation of, Carrie, Brian De Palma's Carrie. So he worked on this. And then Tommy Lee Wallace, was brought in to direct. And, of course, we know Tommy Lee Wallace, Friday Night Part 2, Halloween 3, so on. So he came in, worked all those years with John Carpenter. So he was brought in to direct, and they did the miniseries. And, the thing is like what I say is, this ended up becoming a phenomenon. You got to understand, too, is back in the late 80s, early 90s, I think a lot of younger people don't understand that, there was a time when television, was really very strict about what you could and could not show, on TV. And, especially and that was the thing, this, when it was coming out, that, the news got out that this was coming as a TV miniseries on ABC, this really piqued a lot of people's interest because as strict as standards and practices were back in those days, sorry, my throat's a little dry. As, strict as standards and practices were in those days, the idea of a story about this evil clown that is killing and eating children, people were baffled, people were shocked. Nobody honestly believed that this would ever be a TV movie. And, but then you got to also understand, though, too, this, in a sense, this kind of ended up being a blockbuster movie for television. You had, you had Stephen King's name attached to it. And, at the time, I'm sure nowadays, younger audiences would probably look at this cast and, aside from Tim Curry, maybe they might recognize John Ritter, but most of the actors in this movie they would not recognize. But go back to the time in which this miniseries was being made, this really was something of a star-studded cast. A lot of these now, granted, most of these actors were mostly known for television, but you did have movie actors, movie stars. Tim Curry was a movie star at this point. Tim Curry never really did much television. But but Tim Curry was really he was really just knocking everybody off their feet with, his role, the roles that he was doing in movies. Obviously, Rocky Horror Picture Show, but then people were taking notice of him in movies like Annie and Clue and stuff like this. And so he was a movie star. He was a named star. And then, like I said, granted, most of the actors in here were mostly known for television, but you did have name movie actors. You had John Ritter, who, granted, he kind of became a big success on TV, but he was able to morph away from television and get into movies. And he was already a known movie actor by this point. So he was a big, well-known name. And then, Annette O'Toole, I have to admit, when the first time I saw Annette O'Toole was, going to the theater as a kid, and we watched Superman 3 where she played Lana Lang. And I admit, I kind of always had a crush on Annette O'Toole, but I always thought she was a cutie. But there too, she was a movie actress. She was a name actress. Not just Superman 3, but stuff like, Cat People and stuff like that. So she'd been in some movies. And then, who else was there? Dennis Christopher, plays Eddie. He was more known as a movie actor. Horror fans, we all know him primarily from, this and Fade to Black. Sorry. And then, to round out the rest of the cast was mostly, television actors, but these were well known. Well, I forgot to mention Richard Masur, who, now horror fans, I'm sure horror fans remember him from this, but it's horror fans, when you think Richard Masur, you think of Clark from The Thing. That's the one thing everybody's always going to remember him from, I think. But, the rest of the actors in here were mostly very well-known television stars who, were big hit TV series. You had Harry Anderson from Night Court. You had Tim Reed from WKRP in Cincinnati. Who else was there? I think there's. Oh, who else? Oh, Richard Thomas. I knew there was somebody I was forgetting. Everybody knew him from, the Waltons, John Boy, and all that stuff. So this was pretty much a big name cast for the time that it was made. Not to mention you got Olivia Hussey, from Romeo and Juliet, and horror fans, we know her from Black Christmas, stuff like this. So we had a well-named cast in this, and even the child actors were pretty noteworthy of some stuff. I mean, you had the late Jonathan Brandis, like he had already been in some movies by the time he had done this. Emily Perkins, who, she was up and coming, and one thing that she got a lot of it. I mean, she would go on to do the Ginger Snaps trilogy, but at the time she did this, she was already pretty well known because she did the miniseries Small Sacrifices, where she played Farrah Fawcett's daughter. Seth Green, obviously, Seth Green had already been in some movies and television at this point, like. He was on Tales from the Dark Side. He was in movies like My Stepmother is an Alien. And I forget the actor's name, but the one who played young Eddie, he was on Lonesome Dove and, and on and on. So, I mean, you had some known actors and stuff. And so, so you had a well-rounded cast and everything. And a lot of it, too, was just like, this was really gutsy for, ABC to take a chance on this. And then when they did, it blew up over the course of the 2 nights that this thing aired. And I remember, it was like Sunday, November 18th, I think, 1990. And, I watched the first part and I was just so jazzed by it. And Tim Curry just blew me away with the way he played Pennywise. It still does. And, so I went to bed, the next morning going to school. Now, I knew I loved it. And as much as I wanted to talk about it, I remember walking into the schoolyard and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, man, I would love to talk about this, but, yeah, probably kids, the kids at school are not going to be interested in this or anything like that. Nobody's going to care. Everybody was talking about it. All the kids. As soon as I walked in the schoolyard, everybody's running around. Oh my God, did you watch It last night? Did you see it? Holy shit, that was so scary and all this. And Tim Curry scared me to death. I couldn't sleep after watching that and everything else. And it's like, you knew it was something special. You knew that, it ballooned, it was going to blow up and everything else. And then, obviously the second part a lot of people felt was a letdown, but even still, it's like it did so well. And now granted, okay, yeah, there's really not much or any blood or gore in this or anything. It's kind of very, held back. But what you got to understand is, like I said, the standards and practices was so strict at the time that there was so much that you couldn't do, and this, among other things, really started to push the boundaries of what could be shown in television. Look at nowadays, you get shows like Walking Dead or American Horror Story where they have no problems now showing blood or gore. We're used to. There was no way they could have done it in something like this at the time, but this kind of helped start pushing the envelope, kind of paving the way to get it to where, restrictions on TV shows and movies and everything else really started to ease up, and filmmakers could, become more creative and everything else. They didn't have so many rules and regulations that they had to work against. And in Stephen King himself, in the years following would continue to push, that envelope of what could be shown on TV with, miniseries like The Stand and even his remake of The Shining. That was pretty controversial at the time it came out, because you got a guy terrorizing his wife and smashing her with a croquet mallet and things like that and so on. So, and it's like now, like I said, you got these shows that have movies on TV that have a lot of blood and gore. People are dropping casual F-bombs and all this kind of stuff. You got sitcoms, now they're always, look at Chuck Lorre sitcoms where, it seems like they're constantly making dick jokes and all this kind of stuff. And this miniseries kind of helped move that along. And also, too, it was well made. And as someone who has read the book, they really did put a lot of stuff into the miniseries from the book. And it does follow the book as, I think where this really succeeds, though, too, as a fan of the book, is that, there is so much in that book, and I feel like, Wallace and Lawrence D. Cohen as the screenwriters, I really do think that they were able to do an adequate job of, breaking the book down to what its essentials were and kind of what they could do within their budget and what they could get away with on TV, but try to be as close to the book as possible and try to get as much, from the book that they could get. And I think they did a really good job. I think that all the actors, both the adult and the young actors. Now, that was one thing that always bugged me, was like when these came out, like people were like, oh, the kid actors were so much better in this than they were in this. No, I think the kid actors in both versions did a really fine job. I have no issues with any of the child actors at all. I think in both versions they did a really good job. I think the adults in this version did a really good job. The ones, even though like that was the thing, like when I found out who the cast was for, the remake this year, it's like the only names I knew was James McAvoy, Jessica Chastain, and Bill Hader. The other ones I had to look up because I had no idea who they were. So I was like, who are they? I had to look them up, see what else they had been in. But there are some things, as an adaptation, I think it's pretty decent. I really, I'm always going to wonder what could have been if we could have gotten that 4-part miniseries, that Ramiro was set to direct. I kind of wonder what we could have gotten out of that. I think that would have really been something special. But, I think they did a good enough job with this book. Now, or the adaptation. Now, granted, there are some things from the book that I wish that they did include, but there are certain things I'm really glad that they did not include. I'll give you 2 examples of each. Okay, like 2 things I really wish that they did include from the book. I remember reading a chapter that kind of spooked me about this, where this, kid was walking home at night and he's being stalked, and the evil entity takes on the persona of the creature from the Black Lagoon and closes in and gets his kid. I thought that was always pretty scary. And then like another thing was when the adults go down to fight, the It for the second time, that like all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, and there was a really scary scene, really suspenseful scene where the It creature, possesses a nurse, and the nurse is going in to kill Mike. And this is when he's in the hospital after being stabbed by Henry Bowers. Like he's laying there in bed. This nurse is being possessed and going to come in and kill him. So he has to fight them all. It's like he's lucky to be alive, but he's still got to fight for his life. And that was a really intense and scary moment, a scary scene in the book. Things like that I wish they could have included. Meanwhile, Derry, like all hell's breaking loose. There's a huge storm and everything else. The town is coming apart and all that. I wish they could have kept. I wish they had been able to put that stuff in there. Now, 2 things I'm really glad that they did not put in. Number 1, obviously, the child orgy scene in the book. In my opinion, I mean, Stephen King said, like in his memoir on writing about, like at the time he was writing books like this and everything else, he was so coked out of his mind with all the booze and drugs he was on. And like literally that scene in the book is easily probably the worst thing King has ever written in his life. The scene where, they're trying to get out, after they defeated Pennywise as children, they're trying to get out of the sewer. They get, they get lost. They're trying to figure out how to get out. They're all starting to turn on each other. And to keep everybody together and to keep everybody working together, Beverly decides to let all the boys have sex with her. And it's like the worst thing King has ever written. It's the stupidest thing he's ever written. I'm so glad it never made it into any. I'm so glad nobody even tried to put that in any film adaptation or anything like that. Another thing, too, that I'm glad that never made it in is, like the part in the story where Audra, she's a good wife. She loves her husband, Bill. She wants to go and find him. She's willing to throw it all away. She's going to throw away her acting career and all this kind of stuff because she loves her husband. She wants to find him, make sure he's okay. At the same time, while this is going on, he's cheating on Audra with Beverly. And to me, reading the book, that made me kind of not like the characters as much. You know, because you have this wonderful wife who's going to try, she's risking everything to find her husband to make sure that he's safe. And meanwhile, he's banging another woman. So it made me kind of like the characters quite a bit less. I mean, there's on and on, but now, I mean, you know, like this, you know, we've had killer clowns before. There was killer clowns from outer space, you know, all this kind of stuff. But I think this movie kind of also really kind of started the ball rolling, where now, you know, killer clowns is kind of like its own subgenre. You know, since then we've had, you know, you got Twisty the Clown from American Horror Story. You got Captain Spaulding from the Rob Zombie movies. Doomhead from 31, you know, Art the Clown and so on. I think this movie, I'm not saying this was the only thing, but I think also too, not just in terms of getting the ball rolling, not just, you know, with what TV could be allowed to show and start pushing the envelope, easing up the restrictions, but also too, I think this movie was one of the ones that was pretty instrumental in making killer clowns kind of like its own subgenre, you know, killer clown movies and stuff. So yeah, just, I could go on and on, but it's already over 20 minutes, so it's time to wrap this up. But, you know, just, I really do. I mean, you know, like this is, you know, it's like I said, it's a phenomenon. You know, it's like there's more to it than that. And it's, you know, and with Tim Curry's performance, Tommy Lee Wallace's directing, Stephen King's writing, it's not hard to see why we're still talking about it today. You know, like so much came from this miniseries. This miniseries was a game changer. So, you know. Anyway, I'm sorry I went on for so long. I hope that wasn't too boring for you. So if anybody took the time to watch this, I thank you for doing it, and I appreciate you for doing it. I also hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please leave a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We have a different reviewer, one for every day of the week. I'm the Saturday reviewer. We have a great bunch of guys. Everybody's doing great stuff. And more fun weeks come. And that's it, everybody. So take care. Have a good night, and I'll see you later.